Hi, this is Owen from Owsey, and today we're going to be taking a look at how I went about creating the song you'll have just heard in the track playthrough video. We're going to be using FL Studio 11 exclusively for this, but as always, the principles apply across any DAW you choose to use, be it Ableton, Cubase, Logic, and so on. I don't usually tend to start a song off with any element in particular, but for the sake of today, I'm going to give you a sort of brief introduction into some basic synthesis principles, and for that I'm going to be using Omnisphere. So in FL, to load a plugin, all you have to do is go to the Channels tab, add one, and choose from the list of plugins you already have preloaded. So this is Omnisphere. When people speak about Omnisphere, generally it has a reputation of being a rompler more than anything else, but like all bits of equipment, once you learn the overall architecture, you'll find it really is quite extensive in its synthesis capabilities. How Omnisphere works basically is, here we have two layers, layer A and layer B. Now Omnisphere works by combining these two layers together to create what is known as a patch. And up here we have the numbers through 1 to 8, and we can layer up to 8 patches together to create what is known as a multi. Now we won't be getting that far into things just yet, or we may not even get all into it at all today, but let's get straight into things here. So we'll stay on layer A, and we're already on the synth tab here. So from this drop down menu we have a short list of basic traditional waveforms: saw square fat, saw square bright, triangle, sine, noise, and I know it doesn't really look like much just yet, but bear with me and we'll get looking through things and see what we can do with that. On the main tab here we're presented with three main sliders. The first one being shape. Now in the case of this waveform, it's going to morph it from a saw to a square. So you have this nice little visual representation up here so that you can actually see what's happening as well as hear what's happening. So this is what it sounds like. And below that we have the symmetry tab, which will further morph the waveform. So that's what this is. And below that is hard sync. Now hard sync generally I would use for sort of harsher, more aggressive sounds, but it can be used for a variety of purposes. It's quite easy to overdo this one, and you'll hear that it sounds quite sort of mad in its upper ranges. But yeah, we'll definitely be looking at all three. For now, I just want to go over to the FM tab. Now, most of you probably already know that FM stands for frequency modulation. So frequency modulation basically does exactly as it entails, which is to modulate the frequency by using one of these waveforms below as a modulator. So if I stay in the sine here and turn it on to let you hear what it sounds like. A bit crazy you'll hear, but if I select, say, the noise wave, it'll have different properties to the sine. So and over here is the ring tab. Now this is ring modulation, and in the same way that FM modulates your frequency, ring modulation modulates the amplitude, and here's what that sounds like. And again, the sound will change depending on which waveform we select as a modulator. So on to the next tab, WS. This stands for wave shaper. Now this is a polyphonic wave shaper which is integrated as part of Omnisphere's oscillator rather than a standalone effect. So basically that means that you won't hear the typical sort of harsh clashing sound you get with a monophonic distortion module when you play more than one or more notes. So the difference between polyphonic and monophonic is that a sound that is polyphonic is said to contain two or more independent parts. So that would sound something like this, like a chord. Whereas something that's monophonic is said to have only one note or voice on its own without any additional harmony. So it would be like. And yeah, finally over here we have the voice multiplier tab. Now it has a number of functions. Its first being unison, so we'll activate that here and let you hear what it sounds like. And basically unison is the number of voices playing together, and in synthesis we often tune these voices against each other to create a sort of wider field of sound. So I'll play it again. Down here we can control the depth of that, and so on. We'll get into this more eventually, but for now I'm just giving you a sort of brief overview of how these parameters work, and yeah, like I say, I'll explain in more detail down the line, but moving on is harmonia. Now I tend to use this more than unison, and again this effect, like the wave shaper, is integrated into Omnisphere as a a synthesis component rather than a standalone effect, so it sounds much nicer than your average harmony or harmonizer effect. And basically harmonia will just add more oscillators, so if I turn it on we can play those oscillators against each other and transpose them and create chords by doing so. Okay, so now we have some of the basic functions out of the way, I want to get around to actually creating the sound. So synthesis can often be a sort of long and drawn out process, and it can get quite tedious and take a while for you to get to the point where you're actually happy with the sound. So you're going to have to bear with me while I tweak things to see what sounds good and what doesn't. But yeah, so let's start on layer A. This time around I'm actually going to just use a sine wave. I'll let you hear what that sounds like. So I tend to use sine waves quite a lot as a sort of nice starting point for all sorts of sounds. Yeah, let's get straight to tweaking it. So here's shape. And I'll leave the hard sync alone for the time being anyway, and we can actually move over to layer B and begin to sort of create a patch out of the two. So if I just solo it for a moment by clicking this and turning this off, go to the synth, and from the drop down menu, yeah, we'll just stay on saw square fat for now. So let's get to it. Some FM. Right, so I know this sounds particularly harsh at the moment, but it's not going to end up that way whatsoever. In synthesis your sound can change drastically from the beginning to the end, so just like I say, bear with me, and yeah, we'll get there. There was one thing I forgot to mention, which was the envelope section here. You'll see it ADSR, so I actually just want to go back to the sound for a moment and demonstrate on that on a softer, nicer sound. So ADSR, most of you are probably familiar with this already, but it simply stands for attack, decay, sustain and release. So they are very crucial parameters in synthesis, and while I don't think we'll be exhausting their capabilities today, I will just quickly explain what each parameter sort of does. So attack here, attack is going to determine the amount of time it'll take the sound to reach its peak. So in this case, if I put it up to about 10 seconds roughly, you get the idea. It's going to take the sound 10 seconds to get there. So decay here, decay determines the time it takes the note to go from its peak over to its sustain level, and sustain will sort of set the level while I actually hold on to the note, and release over here will determine how long it takes the sound to ring out when I release it. So if I turn the attack down, and turn the release up to about 5 seconds. I'll play a chord here. And there you go, it takes 5 seconds for it to fade out. So for now I'm just going to leave the attack down, decay, sustain as they are, and turn the release just up slightly. Okay, so now it's time for some effects. Let's go to the effects tab here and let's begin with some spring reverb for now. And we're going to apply this to both layers using this common tab here. Now if you want to just apply the effect to an individual layer, you would just select it on either A or B. So yeah, we'll stick with common for now. And now reverb is undoubtedly one of the most frequently used effects in my own music and then many other artists' songs as well. So it comes in many different forms, and you know, from the likes of plate reverb to room reverb, spring and hall, and so you know, it's probably already obvious to most of you, but what reverb does is, well, I'll paint you a quick picture of how it actually works. So if you kind of imagine yourself sitting in any sort of reverberant space, say a kitchen, a tunnel, a cave, a concert hall, anywhere. So everything you hear is a result of two things. One is the direct source of the sound itself, and two is the surrounding reflections that sound produces. So these reflections can change enormously depending on your surroundings. So you know, for example, inside the cathedral, where you have many sort of surfaces in a large space, it's going to sound much more rich than a square boxed room. So since you have none of these reflections obviously in the digital domain, we need to sort of compensate, and it is studio reverbs that basically seek to emulate these reflections that we hear in everyday life. So this little unit right here, oh, it got a bit loud there. Yeah, this is a nice little emulation of a spring reverb, and actual spring reverbs used a combination of transducers and pickups at either end of a spring to, you know, make vibrations, hence the name. And we aren't really presented with too many parameters here. As you can see, there's some basic tone, width, time. We're not really going to need much more for this purpose, so I'm just going to go through and tweak a few of them. So yeah, when I go you know, to create pad sounds, I'll explain the individual parameters of reverbs and so on in much more depth. Like I say, this is still just a brief overview of things. So yeah, right, okay, so moving on to different effects now. Let's try some delay, I think. Whoops. Now this Retroplex unit is a vintage tape echo emulation. I presume it got its name from the famous Echoplex, but yeah, delay in general can be extremely versatile. You know, from delay you can create effects like reverb and chorus and flange and so on. So how delay works is pretty simple at its core. So delay takes the incoming signal and remembers it, and then plays that signal back at a determined time later on. So this particular unit here doesn't really have, you know, the usual generic delay parameters, as it's modeled after an old tape echo unit. So but for the purpose of this sound, I think it will work. So here, this function will determine the speed and delay times. Feedback will control the amount of repeats, and here we just have some basic modes. Now flutter here, this section, this is a bit nostalgic, I suppose, because basically flutter comes from old recordings and was a sort of short change in playback speed caused by mechanical instability, which caused the sort of unstable wobbling, fluttering of the pitch. We'll go and look through all these in just a minute, but I just kind of want to explain things before I get to that. So over here is a cool function which basically tries to emulate whatever the fidelity was of the chosen area. So if we go down to the 1960s, this sounds a lot more lo-fi, whereas if we go up to say 2000, the sound becomes a lot more crisp. Yeah, so I'll begin to demonstrate these parameters just one by one. Hopefully you can hear the flutter working nicely there. I actually think I need to turn the sound down a bit. It's peaking. But turn the ear down. Right, so let's go back to edit here and turn on layer B. Now I'm not sure what this is going to sound like. If we solo it for a second, I'm going to activate a filter now. Filters are something we'll get to eventually, and I'll explain in more detail, but just for now I want to just quickly apply one to sort of tame those high ends. And I'll also turn the release up in layer B because it sort of stops quite suddenly. So if you remember before, layer B was quite a harsh, aggressive sound on its own, but when we turn the volume down and tame it a bit using the filters, it actually becomes sort of a nice little additional texture to the contrasting sound wave. So for now I think that'll just about sum this particular sound up. I'll definitely use it as some sort of lead synth layer or something, but before we get on to writing any sort of melody, I just want to go through a few more elements. So I think on the next video we're going to take a look at the pads. So yeah, I'll see you then.